Good evening, and welcome to another World of Warships video with Captain Darkwing Glacier. When the Tier VIII Premium American Battleship Massachusetts was released, I was more than excited to try it out. Massachusetts is my home state, after all. In the game, the ship was designed with a focus on its secondary battery, resulting in a playstyle similar to that of the German battleship line. The two ships rivaling the Massachusetts are the Bismarck and the Tirpitz, and the new Massachusetts owners were the target of a lot of trash talk from the German battleship crowd, who were unflinching in their belief of the superiority of German secondary might. As a Massachusetts native, I couldn't take this lying down, and so I decided to do a test of the Massachusetts against the Bismarck. I would play a set amount of battles in each of them, and then compare the average results to see which one came out on top. Soon after I started, however, I decided I might as well test all the Tier VIII battleships I own. This was partially motivated out of a general curiosity, but also to see how the Massachusetts stacks up against all the other Tier VIIIs. Many community contributors have made videos in which they talk about how the Massachusetts is a lot of fun to play, but they do not see it as being a competitive ship like the North Carolina, with its more accurate main battery. Its secondaries are fun and all, but Massachusetts just can't stand up to the likes of the accuracy of the North Carolina, Alabama, and Amagi, or the armor scheme and brawling power of Bismarck and Tirpitz. So, is this true? I decided to find out. For this unscientific study, I took every Tier VIII battleship in my port, and I played 50 battles with each one. Yes, 50. And I recorded all the information I could from the after-battle screens. I realized that there are many websites out there that will collect stats for you, both on a ship's performance on a server in general and for individual players in particular, but I compiled my own stats for a few reasons. First, I wanted a slice of 50 battles for each ship, played around roughly the same time. That is to say, while I have played each ship for more than 50 battles apiece, I played them at different times because of whichever tech tree I was grinding at the time. This might have an impact on the results if I collected old data, because for example, the North Carolina was the first Tier VIII battleship I got, and I was still a relative noob when I got it. I'm a more experienced player now, so if I used my North Carolina data from 2 years ago, they wouldn't be nearly as good as those of battleships that I've played more recently. And second, there are some statistics that the stats websites don't track, such as the tier of the battle. By tracking the results myself, I could not only track my win rate per ship, but also win rate per ship per tier. I could also determine if the hated up-tiering is really a thing, and if certain ships appear to get favored matchmaking. So I played 50 battles in each ship I own, and played each one to the best of my ability, focusing on their strengths. So I didn't do silly things like sit back and snipe with Bismarck, or charge in and brawl with North Carolina. I also played them to my individual playstyle. For example, I know that many players find a good spot on the map, park, and spend the battle bow tanking with the North Carolina. Personally, I hate bow tanking because I think it's boring as hell, and I don't like playing the game that way. That doesn't mean I never bow tank, but I only do it when it's necessary, and the rest of the time I try to keep moving so I can respond to any threats and try to get into the best position, while at the same time not unduly exposing my broadside. So what I'm trying to say is, your results may vary, as you may play these ships differently than I do. These results show how I perform in them, not necessarily how everyone will. And therefore, the goal is to show what my best Tier VIII battleship is, not necessarily your best Tier VIII battleship. Okay, so all those disclaimers aside, I hope that some people might find my results useful, not only for the results themselves, but my analysis of them. The Tier VIII battleships I tested are as follows: Bismarck, Key, Massachusetts, Monarch, and North Carolina. I'm sorry that I don't have all the Tier VIII battleships yet. Amagi and Richelieu are not included because I'm still grinding them. I also do not own the premium battleships Alabama, Gascogne, Roma, and Tirpitz, but if anyone wants to be super awesome and gift me any of them, I'm more than happy to do up stats for those ships as well. My username is glacier_DE if you want to send me one. Okay, so on to the results. I hope you like bar charts because I have a lot of them. The first thing I looked at is the perennial complaint from players of Tier VIII ships, up-tiering. Is it real? I tracked how many of the 50 games I played with each ship were Tier VIII, Tier IX, and Tier X. Also, I wanted to see if there was any difference between the premium ships and the tech tree ships. Do premium ships get favored matchmaking? Yes, up-tiering is real. Overall, just over 50% of all games with Tier 8 battleships are Tier 10 matchmaking. 14% of games are Tier 9, and 38% of games are Tier 8. As far as premium ships getting favored matchmaking, this doesn't seem to be the case. The numbers for the Bismarck and the Key were identical, and while the Massachusetts has the most favorable matchmaking of all the ships I tracked, North Carolina matches it for Tier 8 games at 38%. Considering my sample size is 50 games, I think the variation falls within the margin of error. For Tier 8 ships, about 50% of the games will be Tier 10, a little more than a third will be Tier 8, and the remainder will be Tier 9. This result confirms the complaints of many players. Some ships can handle the up-tiering better than others, so let's take a look at how the various ships stack up against one another. Again, I should mention that these results are for me alone. Your results may vary. Also, the point of these results is not to show how good or bad I am at the game, but rather how I perform in a given ship compared to how I perform in the other ships. Win rate as a measure of performance is a controversial topic, with many players saying it's completely meaningless as a statistic, usually responding to an assumption they've made that all players who mention win rate must believe it's the sole measure of player skill. It isn't, but it isn't also a meaningless statistic. Taken with other statistics, it can provide useful information. Any player can have sufficient impact on a game such that their team is pushed over the edge from defeat to victory. A player who can do this consistently will consequently have a better win rate. A player who plays a ship that synergizes with their abilities and playstyle will have greater impact on games, while a player who plays a ship that isn't a good match for them will have a lesser or even a negative impact on games. So finding the right ship for you can make a difference in your win rate. So how do my 5 battleships compare? Bismarck comes out on top with 72%, with Massachusetts a close second at 70%. North Carolina is in third with 64%, followed by Key with 60%, and Monarch is in last place with 52%. Seeing as how much fun I have with secondary builds, this isn't too much of a surprise. I'm also not surprised with Monarch being in last place. I remember first grinding through that ship and being very frustrated with its terrible torpedo protection and never causing as many fires as I wanted it to. A word about the error bars that you'll see in these charts. In all of the following charts, the error bars are the standard error with z equals 1.96, representing the 95% confidence level. The large size of the error bars in this particular chart is due to the fact that my sample size is only 50 games per ship, and as you can see, there's definitely some overlap in their performance. Okay, now if I break down the games by individual tiers, what happens to the win rates? The Key suddenly does much better, jumping to a tie with Bismarck at 82%. Massachusetts climbs to 74%, while both North Carolina and Monarch actually drop a little, with Monarch going below 50%. This is a surprise because I would have expected all of the ships to do better, since in Tier 8 games they are top tier, and they should have a greater impact on games. For Tier 9, Monarch and North Carolina both climb while the other 3 ships drop, with the Key dropping all the way down to 40%. But then look at those error bars. Tier 8-9 has the smallest sample size by far, and therefore the errors are just ridiculous. So I'm not even going to bother showing any more of the Tier 9 charts because they aren't all that informative. Looking at Tier 10, all the ships do a little better than at Tier 9, except for North Carolina, which drops 4 percentage points to 67%. This time, however, Massachusetts comes out on top by a small margin. But as we know, win rate isn't the end-all, be-all of statistics. So let's take a look at base experience. All of the ships cluster around 1200 base XP, with Massachusetts in the lead at 1310 and Monarch in last with 1162. At Tier 8, all the ships jump up as you would expect, with Bismarck taking the top spot with 1451, except for the Monarch, which actually drops to 1047. At Tier 10, Massachusetts comes in first, Key in second, and Monarch pulls ahead of both North Carolina and Bismarck. I wonder if Monarch does better at Tier 10 because it's not seen as much of a threat compared to the more respected ships such as Bismarck and North Carolina. I suspect that those ships are seen as higher priorities and are therefore taken out earlier, while the Monarch slips by unnoticed in all the chaos, whittling away at the enemy fleet with HE spam. So, Base XP is all well and good, but how does it compare to my teammates? Taken in isolation, we can only compare the base experience of the various ships, but it doesn't say anything about the impact a given ship has in the game. For that, we have to look at my place with respect to the team. One of my ships consistently coming in first place with respect to my teammates implies that that ship is having a big impact on the game. Consistently ending up in last place on my team would imply that the ship is having a low or even negative impact on the game. We'll start off with Tier 8 games only. Seeing as I am top tier in these games, theoretically I should have the largest impact in these games. All the ships cluster around 3rd to 4th place, with Bismarck in the lead at 2.6, North Carolina close behind at 2.7, Massachusetts with 2.9, and then Key and Monarch at 3.5 and 3.7 respectively. Going to Tier 10, we would expect each of these stats to drop a bit, as it's more difficult to have an impact when you're up-tiered. And that proves to be the case. At Tier 10, all the ships drop as I would expect, with Key suffering the smallest drop and Bismarck the largest. But what about overall? Key ends up in first, with Massachusetts a close second, then Monarch, North Carolina, and finally Bismarck. All in all, however, they're pretty close to each other, ranging from 3.9 to 5.0. But how does the performance of each ship impact the game? If a ship's place is near the top of the team during victories, and less so during losses, that means that there's a correlation such that when my ship has a good game, the ship's performance likely helped the team win. If the team loses when a ship has bad games compared to the rest of the team, that would imply that the ship's poor performance contributed to the loss. On the other hand, if the ship's average place doesn't change between wins and losses, that would imply that the ship's performance does not affect the outcome of the battle that much one way or the other. So during wins it appears that there's a general average between 4th and 5th place, which is remarkably consistent across all of the ships. But what about the losses? Key and Massachusetts almost don't change at all, and Massachusetts actually does a little bit better. The other ships all drop in place, with Bismarck dropping the most of all from 4.5 to 6.3. So it appears that Bismarck's performance in a given game has the most impact on the result of the game, whereas Key and Massachusetts have the least. Okay, so now on to stuff that everyone cares about the most. At Tier 8, Bismarck takes the top spot with 2.5 kills per game on average, Massachusetts in second with 2.2, followed by Key and Monarch, and finally North Carolina with 1.4. I suspect that the rate of fire plays a part in this, as the high rate of fire of Bismarck's and Massachusetts' secondaries allow them to sneak in the kill shot on targets, more often than the slower firing main batteries of the other ships. Also, Bismarck's main battery reloads the fastest at 26 seconds, and also it and Massachusetts are likely to get a boost from adrenaline rush as well, since as brawlers, they're more likely to lose some health early and therefore increasing their rate of fire. Again, perhaps the fact that Bismarck is considered a priority target, at least compared to the Monarch, and therefore is sunk earlier in games, giving it less opportunity to get kills before it itself is killed. But since Tier 9 is the lowest sample size, let's just take a look at Tier 10. At Tier 10, the numbers drop precipitously across the board. Things are pretty close, and the error bars overlap, so there is no clear winner. Overall, all ships do a bit better, but again, there is no clear winner, especially when the error is taken into account. But let's take a look at wins only. Here, all the ships get a small bump except for North Carolina. And with losses, only Massachusetts maintains consistency while the other ships all drop in effectiveness. Does this mean that in Massachusetts I get worse teams, or just that Massachusetts has a less overall impact in the game? Now we move on to damage. Starting at Tier 8, Massachusetts is the leader with over 105,000 average damage, Bismarck second with just under 95,000, the long shooters Key and North Carolina very close at 81 and 82,000 respectively, and Monarch in last with only 65,000. At Tier 10, all of the ships drop except for Monarch, which actually climbs a little. Again, maybe it's because it's more often ignored at Tier 10. Key drops the lowest amount, but Massachusetts holds on to the top spot at just over 80,000. Overall, however, the chart does not change all that much. Massachusetts takes the prize with 92,500 and the rest of the ships between 70 and 80,000. But what about the impact of each ship on wins and losses? In wins only, the pattern remains mostly the same, with everyone getting a small bump. In losses, everyone loses some, but Massachusetts and Key hang on the most, again implying that these two ships have smaller impacts on the game. This seems a little strange to me, so if you think I'm interpreting these results wrong, please let me know in the comments. First, I'll talk about hit percentages. In doing so, I should mention that this is a measure of accuracy, not precision. Sigma and dispersion values for ships reflect precision, that is, the tightness of the grouping of shells in a salvo. You can have a ship with a very high sigma value and low dispersion, making your groupings very precise, but your accuracy can still be terrible if you're just bad at aiming. That said, if your aim is good, a high sigma and low dispersion will cause more shots to be on target, boosting your accuracy. To get a high hit percentage, you want a combination of high accuracy and high precision. Assuming my aim is pretty much the same from ship to ship, we can assume that the ships with a higher sigma would do the best. This is a surprise. One would expect North Carolina, with its vaunted sigma of 2.0, giving it legendary accuracy, which is really precision actually, to have the best hit percentage, while Massachusetts and Key should be the worst with their sigmas of 1.7. So what's going on here? North Carolina, fully upgraded and with a spotter plane, has a maximum range of almost 28 kilometers. You might salivate over range like this and relish the opportunity to shoot at your enemy while they cannot respond in kind. But at these ranges, the probability of a hit is very low. With a flight time of about 20 seconds at max range, you have to give the target a tremendous lead, and any evasive maneuvers the ship makes is likely to make the incoming salvo miss entirely. At very long ranges, in spite of its high sigma value, North Carolina racks up a lot of misses. Bismarck, on the other hand, has a maximum range of 19.28 kilometers without spotter plane, as I usually run catapult fighter on it for the better AA protection. It simply cannot fire at the long ranges that North Carolina can. There is a saying that you miss all the shots you don't take, but as far as calculating hit percentage goes, it can be better to not make those long shots, those long range, low probability shots at all. The brawlers Bismarck and Massachusetts fight more often at medium and short ranges, and therefore take more short-range shots at their targets, resulting in a higher hit percentage. Bismarck and Monarch have the same sigma values, but Bismarck does better because on average it fights at closer ranges than Monarch does. The same is true for Massachusetts and Key. They both have the same sigma values, but Massachusetts has the higher hit percentage, probably because of the way it fights. Key and North Carolina fight more at longer ranges, and here North Carolina's higher sigma makes the difference. Okay, now let's look at the damage caused by the main battery alone. Key comes in first with about 74,000, but North Carolina is a close second and well within the margin of error. Massachusetts comes in third, possibly beating out Monarch and Bismarck due to having 16-inch rather than 15-inch guns. So that's the main battery. But what about the reason I started this whole analysis in the first place? How do the secondary batteries stack up? Massachusetts is by far the winner with a hit percentage of 33%. Bismarck is a distant second with 23%, and that's with a full secondary build, including the manual fire control for secondary armament captain skill. Key is very close with 22%, and Monarch and North Carolina are in last with 18 and 15% respectively. The smaller dispersion of the Massachusetts' secondaries really makes a difference. But hit percentage isn't the whole story. Massachusetts has the often mocked American 127mm guns, and only 10 of them per side. Mighty Bismarck, on the other hand, has 6 150mm Deutsche Überkanonen and 8 105mm guns per side. So it's not a question of if Bismarck will crush Massachusetts in its puny secondaries, but by how much. Or is it? Turns out it's no contest. Massachusetts wins, inflicting nearly double the amount of damage that Bismarck does. Massachusetts' high rate of fire, increased accuracy, and the inertial fuse for high explosive skill give it the decisive edge. But wait a minute, you might say, raw damage isn't the whole picture. Another reason for the effectiveness of secondaries is the fires that they set. And Bismarck's 150mm guns have an 8% fire chance compared to the Massachusetts' paltry 5%, which is reduced even further by the IFHE skill. This is where Bismarck should come out on top. So how many fires do each ship set in a typical game? Monarch comes in first place, which is what you would expect, considering that as a British battleship, it is a dedicated HE spammer. One thing to remember is that for this chart, it's fires caused in total, not just those by secondary batteries. But considering that Monarch is the only ship that uses HE consistently, The impact of fires caused by the main batteries of the other ships is minimal. After Monarch, Bismarck does indeed do better than Massachusetts, but not by much, 2.5 to 2.2, and their error bars overlap significantly. In terms of damage overall caused by fires, the ships compare almost identically to the amount of fires caused, which is not a surprise. A fire is a fire, and if you're on the receiving end, a captain tends to respond to them the same way. If you're not a potato, you let single fires burn, and if you get 2 or more, you then put them out if you can. But back to secondaries. Does Bismarck's additional fire damage make up for Massachusetts' higher raw damage? Sorry, Bismarck fans, the answer is no. Massachusetts is still the clear winner. But maybe it's not an entirely fair comparison. Both my Bismarck and Massachusetts captains have manual control for secondary armament and advanced firing training. But Massachusetts has a pure secondary build with inertia fuse for high explosive and basic firing training, while Bismarck has more of a survival build with basics of survivability and superintendent. So that means while Massachusetts might have better secondaries, Bismarck is a tank. Along with the captain skills, it has a turtleback armor scheme, and it's nearly impossible to citadel. Massachusetts, on the other hand, has wimpy American armor, and if it gets up close and personal with a real brawler like the Bismarck, it'll get slaughtered, especially if it exposes its broadside. So let's take a look at how tanky all of these ships are. This chart shows the survival rates for the ships for Tier 8 and Tier 10 games. I didn't include Tier 9 due to the small sample size and because it would clutter up the chart too much. Most of the ships do better at Tier 8 than they do at Tier 10 as expected, except for Monarch, which does the opposite. Again, this is perhaps because Little Monarch is ignored more often by the big boys at Tier 10. Massachusetts and North Carolina both experience drops in their survival rate when they are up-tiered, but not by much. Key and especially Bismarck, however, have large drops, with Bismarck falling from 59% to 25%. For whatever reason, Bismarck, able to tank its way through many Tier 8 games, is much less survivable at Tier 10. I suspect that North Carolina's ability to survive at Tier 10 is due to it fighting at longer ranges. The brawlers Bismarck and Massachusetts are both subject to heavy fire when they close with the enemy, and perhaps this is where the faster cooldown of Massachusetts' repair party makes a difference. The heal might give it just enough of a survival boost in critical situations that would kill a Bismarck. Key's big drop in survivability may be due to the fact that, due to its gun layout, I end up exposing too much broadside and pay for it when those heavy Tier 10 shells shoot at me. Potential damage is a measure of how much damage a ship could have taken if everything that was fired at it actually hit. Ships that are smaller or more maneuverable can rack up high totals as they are harder to hit, while big hulking battleships can rack high totals due to their ability to shrug off lots of damage through shatters or ricochets as well as misses. So in terms of gameplay, potential damage is a measure of how much of a fire magnet a particular ship is. As Bismarck and Massachusetts are the brawlers, it's no surprise that they are at the top, seeing as getting stuck in means you're going to take a lot of fire. Also, no surprise that Monarch and North Carolina are at the bottom, seeing as they're more likely to hang back compared to the others. Key is the outlier, however, attracting more fire than I expected it to. But then it also has the largest error bar. Perhaps this is because I play it as a long-range shooter, but sometimes close the distance when an opportunity to launch torpedoes presents itself. The pattern of damage received overall matches almost exactly to potential damage. For all the ships, the damage received is approximately 6% of the potential damage. The range of values is 5.8% for the Key to 6.1% for the Bismarck. What I deduce from this is that all the ships are equally tanky and that their combination of dodging incoming fire or shrugging off the hits is pretty much the same. But how do damage received and survival rate correlate to each other? Well, first of all, I apologize for how confusing this graph looks. I had to fight a lot with Excel in order to get the charts to show both the damage received and survival rates with different axis labels, and I couldn't quite get the columns for each ship to be separate from each other to make things more clear. But the way to read the chart is that the red columns represent damage received, and they go with the numbers on the left-hand y-axis. The gray columns represent survival rate, and they go with the percentages on the right-hand y-axis. At Tier 8, Bismarck comes in first in the amount of damage received, with Massachusetts second. but they also have the lowest survival rates, which makes sense since they fight up close and sustain lots of fire. Bismarck starts out with 2,900 more hit points, which likely accounts for the higher damage received, but its longer repair party cooldown probably accounts for the lower survival rate. Massachusetts is able to get off its repair party more often before it's finished off. Key and North Carolina both receive a little over 70,000 damage on average, but their survival rates approach 60%. This is likely due to their fighting at range and being focused less by the enemy, or at least being able to retreat when under fire so that they have time to use their repair party before re-engaging. At Tier 10, the damage totals increase slightly, while the survival rates go down. Bismarck's drops all the way to 25%. Bismarck can sustain lots of damage, but it rarely comes out alive. Finally, I also tracked how many achievements each ship amassed during this experiment, and here are the totals. As you might expect, Bismarck and Massachusetts are without a doubt the uncontested close quarters experts. Somewhat surprisingly, considering its formidable and accurate main battery, North Carolina didn't get a single devastating strike. The other ships come close, with Massachusetts taking the lead despite its imprecise main battery. Again, possibly this is due to Massachusetts fighting closer on average to the enemy, where it's more likely to get multiple shots on target when an enemy cruiser or destroyer exposes its broadside. Massachusetts also takes the top spot for Dreadnought with 11, with Bismarck getting 9 and North Carolina in third with 8. I'm not surprised that Massachusetts and Bismarck are the leaders, and again, Massachusetts' faster recharging repair party is probably what gave it the edge here. Overall, Massachusetts is the clear winner with 49, and poor Monarch is in last place with 14. So, what's my best ship overall? I think the results are pretty clear. Massachusetts comes in first or a close second in win rate, base experience, warships destroyed, damage caused, and achievements earned. Bismarck is more the technical winner in win rate, but Massachusetts is close enough that statistically it's a tie. For both win rate and damage caused, Bismarck excels at Tier 8, but then it struggles at higher tiers, possibly because its 15-inch guns are less effective against the more heavily armored ships at Tiers 9 and 10. Key and North Carolina have their place, and Monarch struggles, but it looks like Massachusetts is indisputably the best ship for me. If you made it this far, I applaud your patience and nerdiness. If there's interest, I can do a follow-up that compares my averages to the overall stats for ships from one of the many statistics tracking websites, and see what the differences are across the various ships. Also, if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and if there's interest, I can make more videos like this one. Next up is Tier 5 Battleships, so if anyone wants to gift me a Giulio Cesare, I'd appreciate it. And if you want to see any other specific comparisons, please let me know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.